Hi, everyone. Welcome to Type Talks. Today we have the wonderful, enigmatic Carol Shumate with her wonderful book that is called Projection and Personality Development via the 8-Function Model. It is so great to have you on, Carol. Would you like to tell the audience a little bit about you?
Sure. I have ENFP preferences, and I teach the course on psychological type at Pacifica Graduate Institute in Carpinteria, California. That's a hybrid, partial residential, partial electronic program. And you and I have just been talking about electronics and Zoom and all of the things that we use. I've been teaching there since 2013, so I've been teaching electronically for all of that time. Nonetheless, my type enters in because when you're dealing with live performance like this or anything electronic, it's my 8th function, extroverted sensation. So it always takes me, I have this sort of, I'm waiting for the blank screen moment to happen. But the interesting thing is when you're teaching about the 8-function model, that becomes a pedagogical device. So it kind of works.
Excellent. And speaking of the 8-function model, Carol has a lovely presentation that she has to show all of the audience members. So would you like to take a stab at this?
Or I'm just going to introduce the 8-function model to your those of your audience who haven't seen it. That's sort of quick. I'll try to get through that quickly. And then I get into these stories. These are the 4 types that are going to appear in my stories. So I can show you how the model illuminates the shadow side of our personality. And you know, the shadow is what everybody else in the world can see about us, but we cannot see in ourselves. But now, thanks to John Beebe's 8-function model, we can get access. Well, originally, thanks to Myers-Briggs, because they did the early work. And Jung himself, of course, did the original work in 1921, and then Myers-Briggs did this wonderful codification of Jung's model with the 4 ego functions. And these are considered the conscious functions, the functions of consciousness. But that is just the tip of the iceberg, which is what John Beebe showed us, because these conscious functions are shadowed by their unconscious counterparts. Now, the slide is a little bit messed up. I'm sorry about that. That's because I exported it from Keynote into PowerPoint. But you can sort of see how in this sample INFP example, the dominant introverted feeling is shadowed by the 5th function, extroverted feeling. The auxiliary, extroverted intuition, is shadowed by the 6th function, introverted intuition, and so on all the way down. Each of those is the opposite attitude function. And then Beebe assigned archetypes to each of the 8 positions. Now, the thing you need to know about these is that, first of all, he didn't just come up with this out of whole cloth. He actually, when he first discovered it, the one he discovered, he was having a number of patients who seemed to be operating entirely from a negative personality. I'm sure you know people like this. I know people like this, especially sometimes people are fine for many years of life, and then they sort of have something, whether it's the midlife crisis or what, they go into a negative mood, and they stay there for years sometimes. So he discovered that very often his clients were using the opposite attitude function to their dominant function. And that was how this model, it wasn't a model at first, it was just that one discovery. And those people had what Eric Berne calls a negative identity that was manifesting in their personality. So now these are some of the archetypes. These are BB's archetypes, the ones that he has found that correspond to each of the 8 positions. And these are really, let's say, archetypal complexes, or they can be. And let's think of them as emotional energies. So strength and pride, fostering and protecting, and so forth. So we have the archetypes on the one hand, and then we have the functions over here. And when they combine, that gives us 64 different ways that any personality can manifest. So it's quite an interesting model. It makes it very rich. So what I call these the function archetypes, when you have the archetype with the function, I call it a function archetype. Now, so you have over here on the left, extroverted feeling. I chose that one because we all kind of know what extroverted feeling is, sort of the relationship function. And let's say what happens when extroverted feeling falls in the 7th position, or trickster. Well, the trickster energy, BB tells us, manipulates, camouflages, and deceives. So you have these 2 very different kinds of energies coming together. And what does that make? Well, oh, it's not going to play this. I thought it was going to play for me. Too bad. Well, I have this great film clip of Doc Martin, who is a doctor. It's a British film clip, a British series, and he illustrates extroverted feeling in Trickster. And the slide is not displaying well either, but he has this, the way extroverted feeling manifests in the trickster position is people who have it there say it almost always seems to backfire. And so they're very reluctant to use their extroverted feeling, but they do learn to use it, and they learn to use it kind of satirically or ironically, a little bit of jokiness. That's what the trickster brings. So these archetypes give us clues to our unconscious, because the archetypes are unconscious. And let's think of the hero heroine as the idealized self that can do no wrong. That's often how we think of our dominant function. The second function, the auxiliary function, has parental energy, and that needs no recognition. It's a very lovely archetype. And then the third, eternal child archetype, ignores boundaries, but it's playful and creative. And the fourth one, I use this image of a baby monkey hiding its face, because the fourth, the inferior function, is a place of shame for us, but also of attraction. It's our vulnerability. And it's also our least developed conscious function. So then, how do the archetypes shadow each other? It's not just the functions, but the archetypes that shadow each other. In the so the fifth function here, the opposing personality archetype, is kind of like a lawyer, the opponent lawyer in a courtroom, objecting to everything and speaking in negatives. And you can see Lenore Thompson calls this the rejected not me, everything the hero dislikes. So what do the second and sixth archetypes have in common? Well, they're both parental. The second archetype can be, if inflated, can turn into a helicopter parent. So even this very lovely archetype here sometimes can be have negative aspects to it. Whereas I'll use these really horrible images for the witch senex, the sixth archetype, because this really is perhaps our most aggressive, probably our ugliest archetype in some way. But it's often a disciplinarian, and so we can see how these complexes or these archetypal defenses are necessary. The third and seventh, now it's hard to see what the eternal child has in common with the trickster, but they are both creative and rather playful and transgressive. And there's a spirit of mischief around them. And then the fourth and the eighth, what do those have in common? Well, the eighth is the demonic daimonic, and daimonic means miraculous or divine. So it has, I have both an angel and a devil there. And I think both of these archetypes operate covertly. Beebe says the demonic undermines other people. It operates underground. It's like a mole digging a tunnel until it gets under the other person and then just snatches him down. So, but as I said, they're all bipolar. They're all both positive and negative, potentially constructive. You know, I don't think this one is going to work, and I'm not sure the other one's going to work because I can't see them on this slide. So why don't we take a break from the slideshow and you can just ask me questions.
Yeah, and so wonderful slideshow. I learned a lot about the 8 function model. And so I'm wondering, maybe we can go through your conscious stack a bit and see how you experience it. And so, Carol, what is your experience of extroverted intuition?
Well, it's not just me. It's all my, I have a lot of clients who are ENFPs. I have a lot of students who are ENFPs. And the great thing about type is we can't always see it in ourselves. We can see it in the other people very often who are members of our type tribe. So one of the stories I was going to tell you is about one of my ENFP students who came to me at a certain point in the course and said, Professor Shumate, my grandmother died, and I had a work emergency, and the plane was late, and I had to travel, and that's why I didn't have time to finish the work this week. Now, I can't tell you how many grandmothers die when you get to the hard part of a curriculum. It is so common. Every professor, every teacher knows that. But it could be true, right? It could be true. But the interesting thing is that when you listen to a student who's kind of in the grip of something, if it's an extroverted intuitive, that will talk a lot. Now, we extroverted intuitives also talk a lot just for fun. So there's just a slightly different energy there. But that's how I use my dominant function. It's verbose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, extroverted intuition is very good at banter, indeed.
Yes, right.
Yeah, how do you experience introverted feeling, FI?
Introverted feeling is, I'll tell you a story about when I discovered it, or actually I didn't know anything about type or Jung back then when I was an adolescent, but I had this, introverted feeling is our moral compass, no matter where it falls in our function stack. We may not be quite so aware of it if it's down low, but it's still operating as a guide. So, and when it's up high, and when it's in the auxiliary position, it's used to sort of, the parent function is kind of out there fostering and guiding other people. So I learned to use this to guide other people, I guess, when I was an adolescent. And I had this kind of ideal of a world in which every that's all inclusive. Everybody can come to the party. And so that was my, world peace, rainbows and unicorns. I got quite inflated in that function. And so eventually I got to the point where, tolerance and inclusiveness was the most important thing. And I simply could not tolerate intolerant people. So this is what Jung tells us happens. If a function gets inflated, it turns into the opposite of itself. So I became the intolerant person through that. So that was how I think that's how my introverted feeling function began, perhaps in excess, because I think that's how type operates, especially in adolescence. They're exploring the excesses of their personality and playing with it a little bit. And then now it's not something I hope not as, well, discovering Jung was a huge thing, because then I realized, oh my God, I have this huge shadow. There is no ideal. I'll never be this, thank God, I'll never be this saintly person, because I wouldn't like that person anyway.
Yeah. That's really fascinating how when you use too much of a function, you dip into its opposite. That's fascinating. And so let's go into your tertiary relief function, which is extroverted thinking. How do you experience that?
Yeah. I have so much fun using extroverted thinking when I'm designing curriculum materials or writing. It's like I'm a little kid playing with blocks, and I move blocks of text around and blocks of graphics around, and I move the slides around, and I send this one there and that one there. And it's quite fun. But when I have to be in a leadership position, like if I have to have, when I've had a staff of people under me and I have to direct them, it's kind of fun for a while, but then it gets old. It's not my favorite thing to do.
And how do you experience your last function, or in the conscious stack, introverted sensing?
Bugaboo. So, introverted sensing is a place of money and health and the body. And so it's very easy for me to forget about my body, just to forget that I need to eat, or to, is it too warm or too cold? I don't notice that so much. I just kind of forget about my body's needs when I get involved in something. But it's, that's the real the most minimal part of my introverted sensing inferior function. I would say that anytime the issue of money comes up, my inferior function is up there making a fool of me, really just reminding me of what a baby monkey I really am around issues of money. So, with my student, my ENFP student, his big issue was the time. He kept saying, I didn't have enough time, and I said, well, you need to get permission from the university if you want me to give you a waiver on this. And because maybe his grandmother did die, and he said, no, I can't. I don't have time to do that. That will put me even further behind. So, it was such a classic ENFP student kind of thing to say. And in myself, I think, running late, or the thing about the inferior function is we tend to be obsessive compulsive there. So I'm almost never late. But it's only because I set alarms on my phone, and all kinds of other tips and tricks that I use. But then there are things that just go completely out of my mind. I totally go blank on them. I forget them. That happens.
Yeah. There are some ENFPs I know who can be a little bit time blind, or maybe even blind of SI. So what they'll do is they'll overcompensate by paying extra attention to it. So you'll meet very strangely very organized ENFPs because they know if they don't pay attention to it 24/7 that it's going to fall beneath their fingers.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. We overcompensate in the inferior function. That's that obsessive compulsive thing.
Yes. And so wonderful explanation, Carol. One last question I'd like to ask about your functions is when you talked about money and SI, what did you mean when you said ENFPs have a weird relationship with money? Could you go into that a little bit more?
Well, and ENTPs, that because it's in the fourth position, there's kind of a weakness there. We're just not in control of it. Like, I have never had a budget. I mean, all you have to do is ask somebody, what is it like for you around tax time? What is your, nobody likes paying taxes, but different types dislike it for different reasons. And for ENFPs and ENTPs, it's like they feel dogged by the bureaucratic detail of having to fill out the form and keep the receipts and track down all of that stuff we did last year. That's in the past. I forgot to mention that's part of Introverted Sensing, the past, records of the past, because that's what money is. Money is a record of the past. And trying to keep track of that when it's a really important thing is stressful.
Ooh, yeah, that is a high level of stress indeed. Darn that bureaucracy. And so the APTI, the Association of Psychological Type International, is having a winter conference on February 25th and 26th. And John Beebe, the creator of the 8 function model, is going to be there. And also Carol Shumate too. So if you want to check out that event, the link is below. And I also have Carol's amazing, fantastic book linked below too. So if you like today's talk, feel free to purchase her book and support her. It is wonderful and fantastic in all shades of fantabulous. And so feel free to ask your questions in the live chat to the side. And if we get to them, we get to them. And so Katie asks, what would you say is the most significant reason people should learn the 8 function model after the 4 function model? What is the difference between the two other than the number?
Well, I started out mentioning that extroverted sensation is in my 8th or least conscious position. If you are using, what happens is we tend to use that 8th function completely unconsciously. We use it all the time. We're just not aware of it. And because it's in the unconscious, it builds up kind of defensive energies around it. And the other functions are just no match for a fully demonic 8th function when it's having a complex. So let me say something about the trickster. Well, I don't know. Did I answer that question?
You did. You can answer them in whatever way you want.
Okay. I was going to say something about the trickster. There's an old The seventh function is the trickster function. And there's an old Jungian trope that that says that in order to integrate the anima, which is, the archetype that carries the inferior function, and to integrating the anima is the holy grail of Jungian scholarship and Jungian analysis and analytical psychology, period. So in order to integrate that animus inferior function, you have to access your trickster. Now, how could that possibly be? I mean, the trickster is such an ugly, dark cousin to the eternal child. No one likes it. How could it be that it plays such an important role and a positive role at that? Well, so it's actually, what happens is it's there because very early on in our childhood, we learned to be tricky as a way to protect our little baby ego as it was growing up. So, we just learn to sort of shave the truth and be deceptive. So by the time, and you see it most when you get to adolescence, you're telling your parents, yeah, I'm going to this party. I promise, I'm not going to do anything dangerous, and it's all going to be fine. And your parents have been telling you all this time, you've got to be responsible. You have to do X, Y, and Z. You have to be independent and you have to be responsible. So fine, you can go to that party, but you call me the minute you get there. Now, that's a double bind that every parent puts on every child. It's just there. So it's in our psyche. So how do you navigate a double bind? You have to use trickster energy. Now, this also is the case if you're dealing with a narcissist. I mean, does anybody have a narcissistic boss? Narcissistic bosses are really amazingly good at manipulating people, especially by putting them in a double bind so that you have to work really hard and you have to do really excellent work, but by God, you better not be more excellent than the boss, because then you'll be in trouble. So you're in that double bind. So how do you use trickster energy? So Bibi said that the seventh function is the function that is the most, the easiest for us to use in a tricksterish way. So if you know that, somehow just knowing that enables you to kind of access it a little bit. So when I talked about Doc Martin using extroverted feeling in a tricksterish way, it's kind of using a little jokiness and a little manipulation to get his patients to do what is in their own best interests. I could say a lot more than that. The other thing about the trickster is if you have not really dealt with your anima function, the trickster is, you'll never be aware that your trickster is manipulating things behind the scenes to keep your ego defended. So the story that I told of the ENFP young student, and he was a brilliant, creative guy, but he's just illustrating this one aspect of ENFPness. So, he started to go into a lot of story, and I know it wasn't all, it didn't all ring true. I don't know for sure if it was true or not, but that's an example how we can all kind of fall into shading the truth to defend our ego. And it's more common when we're young. And as we get older, we learn to be maybe smoother in the manipulations, which is not always good either. But it's important to know that if you can get to know your trickster, then if you're dealing with somebody who's trying to manipulate you, you can manipulate them right back. unfortunately, that's what you have to do sometimes.
Fascinating. How does an INFJ use their TE Trickster to make the most of a situation and access their inferior function?
I had an INFJ client who was a CEO and longtime type user, and he, the INFJs, they have empathy because of that extroverted feeling function, but sometimes there are times when there's too much empathy, like someone comes along and tries to trick you or tries to prey on your empathy. And I'll give you, well, maybe I shouldn't use that example. You know when it happens, Joyce. I'm sure all you INFJs out there know that. So you have this extroverted thinking in Trickster. You don't particularly like extroverted thinking. It looks a little tyrannical to you. Why should you, why would you tell other people what to do? Because you're sort of, you don't want to have them come into your world and tell you what to do. But there are times when you have to do that, especially in a leadership position. And this INFJ CEO, he learned that he could tell his people what to do as long as he kept it in kind of he said, I take on a court jester persona. And he said, it's almost like I'm on stage. He said, they know it's not the real me, but somehow they can accept that this court jester is kind of in its way directing them on what to do and how to perform. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you for enlightening me on that. What subject in school did you enjoy the most? What subject came the easiest to you and what was challenging?
Oh, literature was easy. I guess, this is funny. Math was challenging, but maybe history was the hardest because there were just so darn many facts to memorize. And now, of course, I love history. That's one of the things that happens over time. Your inferior function becomes the most attractive thing after midlife.
Have you noticed any connection between functions and heredity?
That's really an interesting question. I haven't. It just seems like people come into the world with their own personality. Jung said it's either innate or so close to being innate that we might as well call it that. And if you've had children, they're just born, with this little personality that has nothing to do with you. It's so different. They come in so different from their parents. I mean, some families are all one type. It's certainly true. But I know that there's a lot of hereditary markers. They have found that, I don't know, what is it? I'm going to get the figure wrong because figures are not my thing, but I'm going to say 20% of character traits may be hereditary.
Ooh.
But the interesting thing is that the latest research shows that we can actually change even inherited traits. We can change our inherited traits. So this is what's wonderful about psychological type. It gives you a roadmap to do that if you want. I try showing others, even when we're not aware of, we're always using our shadow. What is your advice on helping others to quickly see how the ego functions are linked to what's the rest of that sentence? I don't see it.
Shadow functions, yeah.
Are linked to the shadow functions.
Mm-hmm. So if you have someone who loves the 8-function model and they try to show it to their friends, but their friends aren't making the connection between how their ego functions are linked to their shadow functions, how do you get people to see the value of shadow functions and how they make sense with their personality?
You know, it takes, I think it's great that you want to do this with your friends. And you do it, I think, through personal example, through personal stories. And I'm going to, if you'll let me, I'll give you one of those personal stories. First of all, I do want to say too, it has to be a friend that you really care about, that you're really close to, that you really love. You don't ever persuade anybody if it's not coming from love. So that's the bare base minimum. But now I'm going to give you a story about about an incident that happened with my son very recently, where the BB model is just so helpful with this. So I was, my husband and I were selling a condo in San Francisco over the holidays. And we had it on the market for about 5 months, but COVID and all that, we hadn't gotten any offers. And we finally got an offer. And it was a full price offer, but it was like only good until 6 p.m. And it was kind of a tight deadline. And I was wondering, well, if we keep it on for the weekend, maybe we'll get some more offers, because we had just lowered the price. So I didn't know what to do. So I called my son. Now my son has ENFJ preferences, and I have ENFP preferences. Now my son's auxiliary function, introverted intuition, is in the good parent position. And so he was parenting me in this lovely way. And after I asked my question, he had this intuition. It just came to him. And he said, no, that is not a serious offer. It's just not. 3 hours until 6 p.m. Don't even reply. Well, I had asked him for advice. This is a story on how not to ask for advice, too. But then he used his introverted intuition. And where does that fall in ENFP's function stack? Opposing personality. So I was really negative. I found this, I said, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. That can't, why would you write it off so quickly? So then he got it. Introverted intuition operates without any evidence or any data. It just comes in a flash. But he tried then, to produce some data for me. So he went down into his introverted sensing function and talked about his experience buying property in California and dealing with real estate market there. And he said, well, my realtor told me that any offer with less than 24 hours on it is a bad offer. And so unfortunately, his introverted sensing function is in his trickster position. Now, I think he was trying very, very honestly. He was speaking very slowly. I remember that, which is what we do often. We're either fast or slow when we're in our unconscious functions. And he was going slowly. But he was coming from his trickster position. And I heard some sort of trick in there. And, my trickster function got involved. And of course, my introverted sensing function, which is all about money, is my inferior function. So I sort of got into a loop between my introverted intuition opposing and my introverted sensing inferior function. It was all looking really negative, and I said, what if we don't get any other offers? What if COVID gets worse? What if the capital gains tax doubles? I literally said all these things. What if the feds raise interest rates? I mean, I was just I was bombarded with negative images. And my son had to interrupt me and he said, Mom, listen to me. This is California. Everyone's a shark out here. You'll be eaten alive if you don't play hardball. Now, I think, as I said, I think it was being very genuine. But this, when he said that, it was like I went right into my Trickster, and I said, oh yeah, my Trickster function is introverted thinking, which can be very negative in shadow. And with Trickster, it has a little joke, sarcasm, snarkiness to it. And I said, oh yeah, you're Mr. Hardball. You caved on everything when you bought your house. Now, that is not really true. And it was a really ugly and horrible thing to say to your own son, the person you love more than life itself. Where did that come from? That came from the shadow. That is one of those just defensive functions that springs out. And you cannot see it usually when it's happening. You can't see it until afterwards. And when you see it afterwards, it's always a good idea to apologize, minimally. Fortunately, my son, my ENFJ son, knows the BB model well, so we talked about it and had a good laugh about it. But, I have done that more than once. You usually only do this with people you're very close to, members of your own family, because with our friends, we're a little bit more guarded, but with people we love who are really close to us, somehow this is the comfort level that enables us to express and vent some of our shadow. And that's a very important role that we play for each other. And, well, I'll stop it with that.
Thank you for sharing that story.
Mm.
And so Crystal asks, I don't have a problem with my taxes, but I have a huge problem with constructing a resume. Would that also be a type of inferior introverted sensing?
Of course, because introverted sensing is a record of the past. It's sequential. It records the details of our past, and you've got to get all those dates and all those position titles and all of that. You've got to get it all accurate. And getting stuff accurate like that is really hard for ENTPs and ENFPs. It doesn't mean we can't do it. It's just we have to have a real motivation to, like writing a book.
Yeah, getting all the details in a row is difficult. Katie asked, did you ever think you would write a book when you were a kid? Why or why not? And what motivated you to write the book that you have out?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I actually have written 2 books. I've only published one. My first book that I wrote, which is still in manuscript form, was about the Trickster. And that was, I guess my whole life has been one Trickster incident after another, an experience of how I can sometimes, the Trickster sort of sabotages you to save you. And I've experienced so many of those incidents. But I realized that it had type in it. And I realized nobody was going to understand it if I didn't explain the BB model. And I also had access to this huge database of material that from early workshops given by John Beebe to what was then a company that I was associated with, Type Resources. And all of the early attendees at these workshops were very intelligent, very self-knowledgeable type users. And there were Jungian analysts and scholars there. And we had all this data, but we hadn't ever, put it into print. So I knew that I wanted to do that. So that was kind of the impetus for me to do that. It was really so that I could publish my other book, which starting on now.
Yeah, and so I have a question. You said that the trickster sabotages you to save you. And so I'm wondering if you could go into that and how you experience that in your life.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about it already, but I'm wondering if you could go further.
Well, my first experience of that was in grad school when I was in grad school in comparative literature, and I had a professor who intimidated everybody, including me, and I needed to write. I decided I was just going to get a master's and get out of there because things were not, I didn't feel like I was in control of things. So I decided to get my difficult professor was German. And so I stayed as far from Germanic and Slavic and Eastern literatures as I could. And so I wanted to stay in Western Europe. And so I chose to write about Cervantes and Rabelais and do a comparison of them. But then I was tricked because it turned out that this German professor was an expert on Cervantes. So they just assigned him to me. And I thought I was just doomed. And most of the other grad students just thought this was a colossal, they felt so bad for me. And then, but I spent a long time researching it. And eventually I had a really large stack of research. This was in the days before computers. So it was print files. And I was trying to start writing, but I spent about 3 or 4 weeks just, I would organize all of my material. I'd spend all day organizing it. And I'd go to bed and I'd think, I'm going to start writing it tomorrow. In the morning when I waked up, I'd look at it and the sequence didn't make any sense to me, so I'd reorganize it. Well, after 4 weeks, it disappeared. Now, I didn't throw it out. Something happened to it. This is how extroverted sensing in the demonic can operate. But I also think this was my trickster. My introverted thinking trickster tricked me, sabotaged me to save me. Because then I had my back against the wall. I had to do something. And I could leave grad school, but then I'd have to get a job. I didn't want to do that, age 21 or whatever I was. And so I had to just try to recreate what was on those print files. So I had to go back into my introverted sensing inferior function and write from memory. But that's what got me to write my thesis. That's what I just sat down and wrote it and didn't stop. I didn't edit myself. I was afraid to stop because I was trying to get everything out of the brain onto the paper. So I got a first draft in about a month's time. And then, of course, I discovered, I had misunderstood a lot of things. I mean, there were, of course, no references in there, no page numbers or anything like that. So I had to go back to the library and re-research the whole thing, right? So then I tried to retrofit the data to my thesis. And of course, a lot of it wasn't right. It didn't fit the data. So then I had to revise my hypotheses. And that's really actually what good research and writing is about. So I sort of got sucked into it from behind. But when I finished it, it was amazing. I had really, I turned it in, and my terrifying professor absolutely loved it and insisted that I stay and get my doctorate. So I did.
I'm happy there was a good ending to that story. You pulled through. Nice.
Yeah.
And so Rainy Day Commenter asks, how much do you say type is fluid? Let's say for some reason an ENFP had to use TI all day over a long period, 30 years. Would type change?
Wow. The issue of type change versus type development, I mean, I almost think it's like the nature versus nurture argument. But when I'm assessing a client's type, I try to get them to talk about their childhood. Because as we are as children, that's our natural preference. So you can develop any of your functions. And the wonderful thing about, I think, the BB model or maybe other models of type is that it shows us all of the possibilities that are out there. We actually do have access to other personality types inside of us. As long as we know that they're there and not just operating robotically. So if an ENFP had to operate from introverted thinking, I'm not sure that would be so successful, but an ENFP could choose to operate from introverted thinking all day for a long period over time and get very good at it, because practice is what makes us good at something. But you have to have that motivation. So if the person were forced to, no. If the person chose to, yes. Even if it's kind of semi-forced, like I know somebody who's a INTP, who lawyer, who is working from extroverted thinking all the time, and his family had a heavy extroverted thinking bias, I guess. And so he was kind of formed in that growing up. But he's an extremely successful lawyer. I mean, he's not going to give up his profession. And it's kind of easy for him now, I think. I also know I have a colleague who is an INFP, and he had a career in the military and as a helicopter pilot. And it's like everybody, all the other helicopter pilots, all those military ops guys, they're all extroverted sensing types. And here's this INFP kind of, bird out of place there. But he learned that what he had to do, there's this checklist, this terrible checklist that you have to follow. And he had to do it very, very carefully and very slowly. Every time he gets into the cockpit, he has to go through that checklist. And those of us with extroverted intuition, we hate anything routine. It's boring. You have to, force himself to be alert and not just play, not just, it's introverted sensing is in the third position for INFPs. So he discovered that he was really good at teaching other people how to pilot helicopters, because he had to slow down so much to do that part. And he had to work really hard to make it conscious. So when you're working out of type, sometimes you can succeed far beyond what you expected. And you know that old saying, you teach best what you most need to learn.
Yeah, because it doesn't come as naturally to you. You can break it down a little more because you had to break it down when you learned it. It's almost like how a lot of body language coaches these days, so Vanessa Von Edwards, for instance, she started out teaching body language now she's teaching it to CEOs and all these great big people, but it started from her social awkwardness. And so she's like, because I'm so socially awkward, I'm going to learn how to read people's body language to become good at socializing. And because of her natural, how it took a little longer for her to get it, she was able to break it down into sizable chunks for anyone to learn. And so that there's a power in things coming natural.
A perfect example.
Mm.
How can you accept yourself and your ups and downs in life? Well, the lesson of psychological type is that every weakness is also a strength. And you can't have the strengths of your type without the weaknesses. Now, if you understand this strange process of trickster reversals that I illustrated a little bit with my introverted feeling teenage person, you know that if you inflate any function or any experience, you will be turned into the opposite of yourself. But that's interesting. That's actually a moment when you can really learn something. You can really prosper from that if you can stay open. It's painful. It feels awful. I mean, I don't recommend people go out and lose their thesis material. You know, it's not something I enjoyed, but I knew when it happened that it was psychologically important, and I didn't know why. And actually, in that year, I came across the that it existed, that there was a principle from in classic Greek literature called enantiodromia, which is kind of, I called it the perversity principle in my my doctoral thesis. So the perversity principle says, the amount of energy and effort you put into an endeavor will produce that same amount, the inverse amount of satisfaction in the outcome. So this is not a principle. It's not a fun principle. I don't like it, but so I once had a hand-reading expert tell me, she was a handwriting expert, and she said, "Oh, I know what your motto is. Anything worth doing is worth overdoing." And she just nailed me right there. I mean, so true. So what we want to do is be in the flow and relax into the Tao and let life take its course, because then we will have fewer of those horrific trickster reversals. And to get into it, it just means, you know, I think this is where type can really be helpful, because we know we can't be all types. We can't have all the strengths of all the types. We can use a different function at a different moment. We can use a different personality at a different moment, but we can't do it all at the same time, and we probably wouldn't want to. So life becomes much more interesting. You got to look for those mirroring moments, those moments where the outside world mirrors you. And that's something the type is really good at too, because we project our less preferred functions onto other people. And then we blame them for it, even though we have that function in ourselves. And, you know, whatever we don't like about them, that's probably something that we have in ourselves too. It's also true with idealizing projections. We project, you know, narcissists are really good at bringing out our idealizing projections. They can sort of be the person that we want them to be. So I don't know if I answered the question. It went all over the place like extroverted intuition does. Sorry.
It's good. We're along for the ride. We're along for the tangents, and there's wisdom in every twist and turn you take too. So you mentioned anything worth doing is worth overdoing. And so what area of your life do you apply this the most?
Yeah. Well, let me go to this question.
For sure, definitely.
Sounds very dark and unassuming. Does it ever become something that one can rely on with less stress? Yeah, Yeah, I think if you have somebody in your life that you can share shadow things with, and I really think it's great that you know about psychological type, because you have a type community that can do this with you. When I was in this company that was producing workshops by John Beebe, we would have a Friday afternoon chat, and we would all, we were comfortable enough with each other that we could say, oh gosh, I've caught myself using my opposing personality, and oh gee, that question took me right into the witch, and that kind of thing. We could share those moments and analyze them with each other. And then what happens is when you begin to see it in yourself, you don't have to, it's not repressed, so it has less force, and it's not as likely to spring out when you're not expecting it. And you just laugh about it, and it's a source of tremendous pleasure and fun when you have people that you can share these moments with. Now, it's very hard, and it's probably not a good idea to point out somebody else's shadow to them. That's a very hard thing to do. You could only do that with somebody you really love. I mean, that can only come from love. So, I mean, maybe your friendships, you can get to that point, but I think the shadow side is loads of fun, actually. It's a source of endless excitement. You never know what's going to happen next.
Yeah. And so can you use your shadow even when you're in less stress, so in a good place, or does it only come out in a negative space?
Usually, it only comes out under stress.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so Barbara asks, what got you into typology and what keeps you in it?
I was teaching writing at the college level, and I noticed that my students, I had sort of certain students who could write topic sentences, but they had no, they couldn't write up, they couldn't fill up facts and data and evidence. They couldn't provide evidence. And then I had other students who could write the data, but it was just a laundry list of facts with no broader ideas. And I began to see this, and I started to study it. And I realized I could sort of anticipate who these students were, just from the way they interacted in class. And I had sort of little word terms for them. And I thought, this is great. I can publish a paper on this. And then I met somebody who said, oh, you're seeing the functions. Those are Jung's functions. And I said, what? I was really amazed. I actually discovered empirically the Jungian functions. Not all of them, but some of them. And then I got busy and read up on it. And then I thought, oh, this is great. I can use this to teach writing. So I went hog wild over that until the more I did it, though, the funny thing is I started working with teachers and professors how to teach writing, using this system. Every time I talked about it, people would go, what I really want you to tell me is, why is my Aunt Jackie so nasty all the time? They would go right into the psychology. And what do you think her type is? It was like nobody cared about writing, but they all cared about psychological type. So it just got bigger and bigger. I went where it led me.
Yeah. It seems a lot of people get into type because there's suffering that they want to make sense of. So they're like, Aunt Becky is so mean. So I'm wondering, where does that come from? Or, yeah.
Is great. There's an old Polish proverb, may you be blessed with a terrible childhood. Because people who do have those awful childhoods are always, high performers of some kind, because they have to work hard.
It forces you to mature early, for sure.
Right.
And so Ron asks, what part of you is the part that you miss the most?
Miss? Well, I don't think I have. I'm not aware of missing a part. So I'm assuming that is like he's talking about perhaps a function. One of the things that happens when you become more developed in after the second half of life, you start your unconscious functions start to develop it if you don't block it. Some people block it and stop developing right there. But if you just allow it, individuation will happen and those less preferred functions will rise. But Marie-Louise von Franz tells us that that means that the higher level functions will drop, that, it will, the two floors will come together. So I suppose it kind of makes sense. You could say that when I was young, I thought I was going to write novels. And I loved literature and I loved fiction, and I still love fiction, read fiction all the time, and I love movies. And I did try to write novels. I wrote short stories. That was successful. But ENFPs don't often have quite enough staying power to get all the way through a novel. So I did have to give that up. And sometimes I've wondered, okay, should I go back and try to write some fiction? So I guess that would be the part. Thank you for that very difficult question.
What is one tip you would give to ENFPs to be more focused, Marina asks?
The tip that I always have to give myself is carry duct tape. Just shut up. I mean, I can't really do that. I can't demonstrate it here, except listen more.
Is it because extroverted intuition goes on a trail of this reminds me of?
Yes. Yes. And when it's this reminds me of, it's working with the inferior function, introverted sensing, which is, sequential and this long narrative and can bore people.
Yeah. Yes. So sometimes you can identify the functions because extroverted intuition can drown you in possibilities and introverted sensing can drown you in details. And
Right.
so what is your favorite aspect of studying personality type?
My favorite aspect. Well, for me, the big moment was when I went to hear a workshop by John Beebe. And the first morning of the first day, he started talking about the Trickster archetype. And I went, oh my God, that's what happened to my thesis research back in grad school decades ago. So it was such an eye-opener. I had been using type a lot. Then I had other ahas, other revelations, which I thought, when type was taught with just 4 functions, you said, okay, ENFJs and ENFPs and INFJs, we're all in the same group. We're going to get along great. And that was just not always the case. And I didn't understand why. I thought, I would take on a project with an INFJ or an INTJ, and I'm, expecting it to go great, and it was just terrible conflict. And I didn't know why until the BB model explained it. Well, you're using opposite attitude functions. And if you look at INFJ and ENFP, they're opposite attitude all the way down. Now, that also creates a lot of attraction. It's not just a repulsion thing. So you will have a lot of friendships in this group, but then you also have a lot of misunderstandings.
Mm-hmm. Tips for ENFPs recovering from childhood trauma?
Yeah. I think that ENFPs can make great progress and find life very rewarding, traumatized ENFPs, if they find a means of creative expression. So that could be painting or writing stories or children's stories. I don't know, even making something simple, doing maybe landscape gardening or something, wherever your creativity draws you. Maybe it's cooking. I don't know what it would be. But if you find something creative to do, that trauma becomes like really transformed into something very powerful. It becomes quite a beautiful sustenance to yourself, and then you can be an example of hope to other people too. There's a part of it that has to do with also, I think it's important not just to make art or creativity for yourself, but to share it, take it out in the world, because you always want to be in relationship with the world. That if you can do something for the world, that will really help heal that trauma. And I don't mean the world big. I mean one person, one small part of the world,
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing it you're taking what you've learned and giving it away, it's very rewarding.
Yeah. It's serving and growing others is the main purpose in life, and so it's quite amazing to do that. They say that you're either growing or you're dying, and so it's good to have a method in which you can give back, because it allows you to keep growing. Because whenever you give, you learn a little bit about the world or yourself or others too.
Yes, good. You've learned that, Joyce. We should let you tell us.
And so Katie asks, have you ever tried to consciously develop a shadow function? Why or why not?
I am consciously trying to develop introverted intuition right now. I mean, so I want to have those amazing intuitive insights that introverted intuitives get. Now I have intuition that comes through extroverted intuition, but introverted intuition operates through images, and it's quick, and it's slow waiting for it, but then when it comes, it's very singular, I would say, as opposed to extroverted intuition. So I want to allow those introverted intuitions to come without having a negative reaction and saying, oh, that can't possibly be right. It's amazing to me to see that the number of INFJs who will make a major life decision based on an introverted intuitive image they got. My son does this all the time. It's so remarkable to me, and it's quite often right on target. Quite often there's some truth for that individual in that. It's where they need to go.
Well put. Well put. Would you recommend someone take on work that is challenging for them function-wise, or should we lean into occupations that favor our ego functions?
I think you should find something that you have a passion for and that you're aiming toward. So if you can identify your passion, even if it's something that you are not, that isn't quite in your function preference. As I said, even if you're working out of preference, sometimes the people who are working out of preference get raised, get promoted like crazy because they have skills that no one else has. I knew of an INFP who joined the military and just rose through the ranks, so fast because that INFP, he understood all the problems that all the other members of the platoon were having, and they would talk to him, and so he performed this really important role of kind of holding the dark side of all of these other people. And he just got promoted up and up and up. I mean, we don't think of INFPs, they're so peaceful, they're so, how could they be a warrior? But he played a very important role. So you can take on a field that is out of type for you, but you have to have that sense, that passion or sense of purpose. Not so much I want to be X, but I would really love to do X. I would love to, whatever it is, fly or ski or make a lot of money in the stock market or whatever it is.
Yeah. And so as long as you have a big enough internal motivation, you can get yourself to lean into it. But typically we tend to have more internal motivation with the things that are within the things that we like which are our functions that are typically conscious. But you could have a weird case where someone can value something outside of their conscious functions too, for whatever reason as well. And so what advice would you give to a person new to cognitive function who wants to develop their shadow functions?
Buy my book. Has all these tables at the back, so you can go through them and see how each of the functions tends to manifest for each type, or how that's been reported, and it'll give you some new thoughts, new perspectives on yourself. I think also join some sort of type community. The fact that you're in Joyce's, following Joyce's group, but I like the APT groups, Association of Psychological Type, that Joyce mentioned is having a conference, and I particularly like the chapters, the Bay Area APT, which is BAAPT.org. They have wonderful Zoom calls, every month they have somebody presenting a type. And because they're up in San Francisco, they've had John Beebe present for them. They know the 8-function model really well. So the Bay Area APT, go to their things every month. It's always a Saturday. And you will have somebody to talk to, because the main thing is you want someone to talk to. So if you have a good friend who's into it, you can talk to it and you can try to say, am I analyzing this correctly?
Yeah, to have a sounding board is helpful.
Yes.
And so Barbara asks, would you describe the admiration and adoration one has for others that share our 5th function?
Yeah. Well, it's, who can say, who understand, who among us understands attraction? You know? I think it is in the form of just kind of liking to, you kind of may enjoy their company because there's room for you somehow there. I mean, because they're, you know, sort of the negative image of each other. There's, you know, if I'm with an INFJ, my INFJ co-editor of the journal I edit, yeah, she, I like bouncing ideas off of her. We have a really nice relationship because we see things so differently. It always comes down to, okay, what is this piece of writing? What did it do well? And what is the writer trying to say? And we always have a sense that is the same between the two of us, even though we're coming from different directions. So I think that's, you know, we do actually, we communicate a lot by email, but we also have maybe a regular monthly meeting, or every other month we meet in person, and we just chit chat about, we mostly gossip about all the shadow functions we've seen in other people.
What's really nice about people who share our fifth function as their dominant function, so for the INFJ, it's the ENTP and ENFP, it's that I noticed that all types that lead with an intuitive function at the top tend to view things in shades of gray. And so they can see the concept, but all the nuances and complexity and the paradoxes within a concept. And so we exist in that ability to think within the grayness. And I find that very refreshing because oftentimes I'll explain the gray and it'll get cut off. But when it's with another intuitive lead, so within any dominant type, there's this ability to explore intuition in a new light almost. And so Melissa asks, any correlations between MBTI types and learning styles, such as being visual or tactile?
Yeah, a lot of work has been done on this. Jane Kesey, Kise, has written a lot of books about learning styles and type. And I can't think of the name of the guy that made a big, had a big learning styles kind of company, but a lot of work has been done on that. Yeah. So there are correlations, and of course you can see it. You can see that extroverted sensing types are the tactile learners and the kinesthetic learners, should we say. They need to move, they need to try things before, they need to have the physical experience of it before they get the theoretical understanding of it. That's just one example.
That is so cool. So what are the differences you've noticed between you and INFPs?
Well, this is a really good question. It's kind of hard, you know, sometimes to tell the difference between ENFPs and INFPs. They have so much in common. The big difference, well, I'll tell you what I tell my students about INFPs. If you have an INFP in your midst, you have to be kind of careful. It's so easy to tell an INFP everything. They're wonderful counselors and therapists. I mean, like I said, they can sort of hold the dark side of the other person. But that's also, in a way, an imposition on them. And if it's not a professional situation that they're being paid for, you need to be careful. Because INFPs are such a sensitive type. So the big differences, physical differences, are the extroversion and the introversion. The ENFP moves, gestures, interrupts when talking, can't stop talking. The INFP will pause before replying to a question, because introverts think before answering, and is more composed and more focused, although a little bit of motion, because extroverted intuition does have motion. So there's a little bit of motion there. Those are the physical things. And then there's this capacity that is so endearing with INFPs to hold anybody's darkness is quite remarkable. I know I whenever John Beebe has ENTP preferences, and he lectures mostly from Introverted Thinking, which is just beautiful to listen to and watch. It's just remarkable. But when I'm in a workshop with him, like an all-day workshop, and he's leading it, it's very exciting to me. At the same time, I find myself, it takes me down into my shadow, introverted thinking, the abstractness of it. So I find, my head starts to spin, and I get cold hands, and I find that if I get up and move, it helps a little bit, but it also helps if I go sit next to an INFP. Don't ask me why that is, but there's this warmth coming from the INFP that you don't get from the ENTP, which is all about up in the air, head abstract.
Yeah.
I hope to learn more about INFPs. I really do. I think they're a fascinating species.
They very much are. One of the other differences you'll see often is if you present an ENFP with a problem, they're more likely to see the possibilities, and they're more likely to say, to almost see the potential of the situation. Whereas I notice when an INFP is confronted a problem, sometimes it's easier for them to go into a neurotic space. So they actually skip over their NE when they're feeling not that good.
I've also noticed, and I learned this from my INFP students, they are wonderful parents quite often, usually, and because they model the integrity that means so much to them, and to see somebody modeling that's the best way to learn. But when it comes to getting the dishes washed and the vacuuming done and all the rest, very often their children are not taking them very seriously, because that extroverted thinking is coming out of their inferior function. So the children say, "Sure, Mom," and then kind of, may do it or may not.
Yeah, that's funny. What attracted you to the shadow functions versus temperament essential motivators theories?
When I first learned about type, somebody introduced me to temperament, and I found it very helpful, because at that point, type was only taught in, the 4 dimensions, and I was trying to get a feel for it. And it was so interesting to me to see 2 dimensions paired, like SJ. So it was the first time I'd seen that, and I found that very insightful. now, so I found it useful as a stepping stone to get more into type. Then actually there was a group called Osmond Sibley and Smoke that developed a model similar but different. It was the function couplings. So each function coupled with another function created four type groups. And when I saw that, I thought that was really on target. For me, so that is still interesting to me. But I think once you get into the oppositions between the opposite attitude functions, you realize that there's so much more to type than just temperament gives you. You know, why are these functions so different? You know, why are INTJs and ENTPs so different? So different they don't even recognize each other sometimes. And I think that Beebe's model explains that really well.
Yes. BB's model is definitely in your introverted feeling box.
Yes.
A lot of love towards it. Katie asks, have you noticed that people relate to those who share ego stacks more often than not? Or do you find that the cognitive differences become a binding point? Blinding point, probably.
Blinding?
A blinding.
I think it says blinding, not blinding.
Oh, okay.
Blinding point. So people relate to those who share. I don't know. I think I'm gonna make a guess. I think that the people that I enjoy spending time with now, as opposed to when I was, I don't know, in my 20s, and you know, anything goes when you're a 20-something having fun. But now I'm more selective, and I guess I certainly have a lot of friends who are not at all related to psychology, let alone psychological type. But I appreciate the ones those people who have an ability to see themselves and consider other perspectives, and don't always think it's my way or the highway. They don't always think that, they don't automatically think that they're right about everything. And they have a curiosity about learning about other things. And so if I'm with a scientist or I don't know, a lawyer or someone, there's always something that we find that we can discuss in depth, whether it's maybe politics or history or films, and we can have a really rich discussion because we're all trying to investigate honestly the human condition.
How can the NFP students deal with STJ teachers?
Oh, you know, STJ teachers can be great, can be terrific, because they will tell you the correct sequence in which to do things. And we NFPs, we like to do things our own way, but sometimes it's really helpful to learn a procedure. And even though it's kind of painful for us, it can be extremely helpful. I learned the BB model from Bob McAlpin, ISTJ, who was a fantastic teacher. He would always tell me, that's not correct. I would say something, I would go, oh, it's not, so he saved me, you could say, from misunderstandings. And I think that, so how do you deal with them? There's so many answers. Are you having a specific issue? What is the specific issue? Tell me a little more, and I can give you a little better coaching on that.
Yeah, that's a wonderful example that you gave. I'm wondering if they could be referencing how NFPs can sometimes have a rebelliousness, like you mentioned earlier about the routines or like establishment bureaucracy. So how do they kind of deal with possible?
Let me say, when you're dealing with an STJ, their dominant function is introverted sensing. So they are kind of focused on past performance and experience, and they're coming from experience. So you don't want to ask them to project into the future and say, well, what do you think would happen if I tried X, Y, and Z? I mean, that's not going to get them to a good answer. You have to work with them through introverted sensing. You have to ask them questions about their experience. How did you learn this? How did this work for you? That kind of thing. You try to use their preferred function.
Yeah, that's good advice, because sometimes we'll try to we'll try to communicate by using the things that come most naturally to us, and we may be drawing a bigger divide through that.
Yes.
Yeah, it's almost like they need experience to fully make the full connection, or some sort of specificity. And like the intuitive inclination is sometimes you make it more vague and broad by talking about the future, and so you have to really ground it in the concrete to make it more communicatable. How interested are you in trying new things? Do you jump in right away, or do you like to research before you engage in new experiences?
That's an interesting question. I think I used to be a lot more into new experience than I am now. I wanted, when I started life, I wanted to be a mountain climber. I wanted to be an expert skier. I wanted to be, that was when I was growing up in Odessa, Texas, the flattest part of the earth. I'd never seen a mountain, so I thought, it can't be too hard, right? It looks like a lot of fun. So I did become an expert skier. I mean, I just wanted to, and I did. And I also decided I wanted to live abroad, and I did live abroad. I lived in, 5 or 6 different countries: England, France, Italy, New Zealand, Israel. Anyway, I sort of, after I went through that period, then, at this point in my life, I've kind of done all those new experiential kinds of things I wanted to do. It doesn't mean I'm not interested in doing new things, but I think definitely now I would engage in research before I take on something new, because I'm more.
Mm-hmm.
Not all those new experiences were good.
Interesting. And so Barb asks, as someone with Catalyst and F preferences, what is your relationship with each of the other 3 essential motivators? Stabilizers, SJ, improvisers, SP, and theorists, NT.
So it sounds like you're talking about people, not psychological states, because those terms refer to people. So I have learned, and it's really psychological type that taught me this, I have learned to appreciate SJ stabilizers, SP improvisers, and NT theorists. My father had ISTJ preferences, and he and I had sort of kind of like this a lot in my childhood. But when I was mature and learned about psychological type, I went, oh my God, that's explained it. And then we formed such a close relationship, such a nurturing relationship. And I'm so glad that I was able to understand his really wonderful qualities. What a great childhood he gave me. So much security, because that's what SJs are good at. Currently, my best friend has ESFP preferences. When I first met her, I didn't think we were going to be friends because, I thought, she's maybe a little superficial or something. I don't know. And then she's the one that introduced me to Jung. And so it was just, and to this day, she's absolutely my closest friend. And I can't get by without her. I've just learned so much about enjoying life. The SPs really know how to enjoy life. Now, NT, my husband, we married sort of late, but not that late. We've been married for a long time now. He's an INTP. And I married him before I knew anything about type, thank God. Thank God I found psychological type, because it eased up a lot of our tensions, a lot of our arguments that we were having, and just sort of misunderstandings, silly misunderstandings. And now we just laugh all the time about our differences. And I'm so grateful to have this really brilliant person in my life who can actually understand my book. Who knew? Who knew we could learn to do that?
That's great. You have someone to talk about and bounce those concepts with. Yeah. Because sometimes with any dominant types like the ENFP or the ENTP, they get told throughout life that their NE is too much, or that people don't really know how to bounce ideas off with them. And so it's nice that you have your husband to do that with. That's fantastic. Yes. And so Amy asks, what is the importance of storytelling when it comes to changing society, as opposed to only using things like statistical facts and numbers? Do you think storytelling is undervalued?
I don't think storytelling is undervalued. Look at the influence of the entertainment industry. Films, literature are still extremely powerful means of making change. I get where you're coming from. I think you're talking about that Cartesian rationalism, which has been part of Western civilization since the Age of Enlightenment. But personally, I think storytelling still holds its own, even in those arenas of science and high tech and so forth. And if you find a good storyteller in that sector, that person does really well, and often gets his book in print and gets himself on the TED Talk stage.
Storytelling is one of the best ways to kind of imprint your point into someone's mind, because there's a human element or a relatability to it that people can kind of absorb. And so Yeah, it's something that I'm trying to work on because it's not something I'm good at. Because with introverted sensing very low in the demon position for me, it doesn't occur to me to explain things and experiences. And that's to my downfall, because that's how people feel connected to you sometimes. It's through hearing about your past experiences. And so that's a point of improvement.
Yes, one of the things I say to my INFJ authors, who are actually wonderful writers generally, but I give them little margin notes. Could you give me an example of this? You know, they have these wonderful, big, abstract statements, but I want to see an example, a real life example, not a hypothetical. So.
Yeah. A problem in me explaining stuff is I'll explain the conclusion or the singular idea or insight, but I won't explain the context. So people will be like, well, what's the context behind that? Can you provide an example? Yeah, I even had someone tell me, like, I asked for feedback once, like, how could I be a better friend to you? And they were like, providing examples. So, and I was like, oh no.
Oh, Joyce, you are brave that you ask friends, how can I be a better friend? That is so sweet. I'm not sure I would do that.
Oh, thanks. Katie asks, should personality development be incorporated in the education system, or should it be kept to personal choice?
I tried for years to get type into the education system. And I did mention before, there's one person who has done a lot of work in that area, and that's Jane Kesey. But really, it's a tough haul. Teachers have so much on their plates. They can't take on one more thing. I mean, if you want to get it into your local system, you will do better to take it to the parents, go through the PTA, because the parents, you know, you're giving them a tool that will help them understand their own kid, and so they want to use it.
Absolutely, definitely. The ENFP SI reminders to not forget other things. That's great. And so thank you, Carol Shumate, for coming out and having such wonderful ENFP insights and 8-function model mind-blowing viewpoints to enlighten the typology audience and to provide them this 4-dimensional way of seeing type. It's almost like you took the 3-dimensional viewing of it and you made it into a 4-dimensional and even more amazing and beautiful. And so thank you for giving it dimension and shape and beauty and vividness through your ability to explore that beautiful zone that is the 8-function model. And so feel free to check out Carol's book. It's linked down below. And so if you want to learn more about the 8-function model and all of the wonderful insights and just the wonderful knowledge and wisdom that Carol contains within her on the 8-function model, feel free to check out her amazing contribution to type that is in her book. And as well, everyone, there is the APTI Winter Conference, as we talked about, where John Beebe, the creator of the 8-function model, is going to be there, and Dario Nardi and other keynote speakers, as well as Carol herself. So if you'd like to attend that event and learn more about the beauty of seeing type in all these different models and perspectives and theories, go check out the Winter Conference link that I have below too, and you will be very, very much enjoying that experience. Yeah, so if you're a type enthusiast, type lover, and you must be if you've made it this far into the video, feel free to check out that event, because it is like the Comic-Con or the Fan Expo of type. So if you want to go to a place where mutual type nerds meet up and learn and share and grow together, then go check that out. Carol is amazing, and the people there are also equally so. So thank you for your wonderful breakdown of the 8-function model, and showing us the archetypical genius hidden within it. And so,
Thank you. It was wonderful to be here.
You have people who've read your book too, and they're like, yeah, I recommend it.
Questions. These were just really deep, thoughtful questions. You have a terrific audience, Joyce, and you're doing amazing work. I use your videos to teach my students about type.
Yay. I'm going to take your compliment and then put it into a bottle and then save it forever in my heart. So like Carol Shumate complimented me. It's like getting complimented by Type Hollywood. It's like, oh yeah, that's great. Anyways, I'm going to put you less on the spot and make you feel less awkward. And I'm going to end it right now. But thanks everyone for asking your wonderful questions. And we'll see you all in the next episode.